Have you ever had that moment in life where you hit rock bottom and things literally couldn't get worse, but they did? You ever had that? Like, there's no way. Like, maybe you're at a Giants game and the team is losing. I don't know if anybody else has ever had this, and then the seagulls come out and you feel something warm on your jacket. Anybody ever had that experience, or just the pastor? No one, seagulls never got anybody besides the thank you. We've got a couple honest people in the room. Listen, there's no shame in this. It's a thing. I remember one time for Shauna and I, a day that it just seemed like things couldn't get worse, and it will surprise you what day it was. It was Christmas 2007, and here's why. Shauna and I know some of you, it would be a relief if you didn't have to travel to see your family. Some of you have crazy families, right? Everybody has a crazy aunt or uncle, but some of you, the whole clan is crazy, and so you're looking for ways out. You're lying to them, telling them you have to work on Christmas when you don't, so that you can stay here in the city. It's lonely, but it's better than being with them. But we really, really like our families, and so Christmas 2007, the reason we couldn't travel that holiday season was because Shauna and I, she had just given birth 6 days prior to Asher, our youngest, December 19th, 2007, and it was just one of those days. We had always traveled for Christmas. We thought we would handle it okay, but you're not getting any sleep, especially her. We have, in addition to the baby, 6 days old, we had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so we were, it was depressing. It was just, I don't know if anybody else, but for us, it was depressing that we couldn't travel. You guys keep coming on in. It was depressing for us. We couldn't travel that Christmas, had a brand new baby. We couldn't go see our families, either one of them. And it was just a terrible situation. And, you know, you get excited a little bit for that Christmas moment, but we had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it doesn't take them but 10 minutes to open presents. And so that's kind of down the drain. But then you really don't want to cook for yourselves when you're home alone for Christmas, right? So I think I had maybe the older 2 boys. We set out to go find, in the city we were living in at the time, to go find what was open on Christmas Day. What's the best meal you've ever had on Christmas from a place that was actually open? Not family, but Waffle House. What else, Chinese? Where? See, none of you have ever had this in life. You've always had grandma's pies and turkey and all that stuff. By the way, just another confession from your pastor, I'm not a huge fan of the holiday meal. You're not either. If you were, you'd eat it more than twice a year. I'm just saying. You don't like it as much as you think you do, okay? But on this particular day, we set out, and the only thing we could find open was a Burger King. The day that couldn't get any worse is worse, all right? Unless you love that. I haven't been lately, but I did see the commercial for the French fry burger. That's quite a novel idea, by the way. Don't raise your hand if you tried it. I'm sure it's awesome. But it was the only thing open this day, and because it was the only thing open, we weren't the only ones in the drive-thru line. We were in the drive-thru line about 45 minutes. We're really hungry, and nothing else is open. And it takes forever, and finally we get our food. We go home, and, you know, things aren't great at home. It's hard when everyone in the family's down. It's hard to console each other. Have you ever had that experience? Like, you come home to tell your roommates how terrible your day is, but they had a terrible day. You're like, oh, you're no good for me. It was kind of like that. So Shauna had been home with the baby, not sleeping, feeding all the time, and got home, and the food that we weren't even looking forward to wasn't even there. Like, the stuff we ordered actually wasn't in the bag. The day that seemed like it couldn't get any worse got much worse. For those of you who were here, or if you weren't here last week, we kicked off this When Life Crashes series. And in this series, we're looking at the life of Joseph from the Old Testament book of Genesis. And when we left Joseph, he was at a place where it certainly seemed like things could not get worse. Let me catch you up on his story. He had been loved by his father more than any of his 11 siblings, which made his brothers hate him. So he's been hated by his brothers. They hate him so much that they want to kill him. I hope you haven't been in that scenario. If you have, I'm so sorry. I'm glad you escaped. But his brothers want to kill him. They decide they're going to kill him, but first they put him into a pit that doesn't have any water. So he's just hanging out in a waterless pit, empty-handed, got nothing going on. Brothers are eating, and these Midianites, these Ishmaelite traders are coming down the road, and they think, well, here's an opportunity. Joseph must be worth something, so they pull him up out of the pit. They sell him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. So he's been sold, and the Ishmaelites take him to Egypt. This is how he lands in Egypt, in case you didn't know that part of the story. This is how Joseph gets to Egypt. The 10 brothers actually go back, and they tell their father Jacob that his favorite son, Joseph, has been killed by wild animals. It can't get any worse, right? Think it could get worse? Come on, I'm trying to tease into the message this morning. Help me out. It couldn't get any worse, Pastor. That's right. If you have a Bible, I would love for you to open up to Genesis chapter 39. If you need a Bible, would you just raise your hands? We have well-equipped volunteers who are ready to put Bibles in your hand. So just keep your hands up high. You'll receive a Bible. This is a gift from us to you. 2 reasons we think it'll help you follow along this morning. You obviously can get this on your smartphone, iPad, whatever. Even if you have one of those new colorful iPhones and you want to show the audience this morning, you can hold it up just to prove that you're better than us. On page 21, you'll find this in the Bibles that we hand out, but we also give these Bibles out, and just so I can let all of you know, we believe that God has revealed himself in the Scriptures, and we also believe that God has revealed the way in which he wants us to live. It's amazing how we can live relationally, packed up here in the Scriptures, where we came from, what's the purpose for our lives, and so we use that a lot. Here's what I want to do this morning. In just a minute, I'll have you stand. We're going to read a lot of verses, chapter 39, verses 1 through 20, but I want to pause after verse 6, and then I'll pause after verse 10. Stay standing. If your health won't allow you to stand, please feel free to stay seated. Or if you just had a long night last night, feel free to stay seated, but keep your eyes open, okay? That's all I'll ask. Would you stand with me? Bottom of page 21, if you have the Bibles that Epic gives out. For the rest of us, Genesis, first book in the Bible, including the New Testament, obviously, the Old Testament. Page 21, but for the rest of us, Genesis 39. I'll read 1 through 6. I'll make some comments. We'll pick up 7 through 10, do the same, and then we'll finish it off. And you're thinking already, I cannot believe this pastor is using 20 verses this morning. It's going to fly by. It's sort of soap opera-like if you've missed those this week. It's very soap opera-like. So here we go, 39. We'll get 1 through 6 and say a few things. Stay standing. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. So he's been sold again. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him, that's Potiphar, making Joseph overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. Verse 5. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. All right, let's just pause for a moment. Here's what's happened. Joseph has been sold again, so I hope you've never been sold once. I doubt any of you have been sold twice. He was sold again to Potiphar, but it sounds like a pretty good gig. If you're going to be a slave, this is the kind of master you might want to have. So Potiphar's captain of Pharaoh's guard. He's now bought Joseph, and God is making all that Joseph does under Potiphar's rule and reign, he's making all of it succeed. God gives favor to Joseph right there in Potiphar's house, so much so that Potiphar elevates Joseph. This will become a trend for Joseph. Potiphar elevates Joseph and now has made him overseer of his house and has said essentially, I trust you completely with everything that is mine. But then verse 6 tells us that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Now, what's interesting, this is not part of the message, but go back to Genesis 29 sometime. About Joseph's mother, Rachel, it says the exact same thing. She was beautiful, not handsome, she was beautiful in form and appearance. So there's definitely a genetic thing happening right here, okay, between Rachel and Joseph. And when I asked all the great theologians around me, what does this mean? He was handsome in form and appearance. Ben, he had a pretty face and great muscles. Okay, so just form and appearance, the way he looked and just his form, something like the pastor. Right, Shauna? Absolutely, she said. Taken. Verse 7. Let's see why this was mentioned. It seems kind of odd. He was very successful, and by the way, he was handsome. Verse 7. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said to him, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Pause. So you've got this woman coming on to Joseph one time, and he refuses her advances, and she tries to entice him again, and the scriptures say that she does this day after day after day, and he does what many of us in this room would not be able to do. He's in that pressure, under that pressure every single day, and he says no. He's doing exactly what God would want him to do. In fact, I love what he says to her. He's like, "Listen, your husband has given me availability of everything except for you." Guys, this is a good place to start, okay? Everything is yours, Joseph, but you just can't touch my wife. And he abides by this and says to her, "How should I do this wicked thing and sin against God? How should I do this wicked thing?" And he does the right thing. Joseph keeps his purity. He keeps his integrity. And so as we continue reading, what you would expect to find, and what Joseph certainly expected to find, was that God is going to bless him for this. He played this out just like God would want him to. He played it out just like God would want you and I to. Let's see what happens as a result of his integrity and purity remaining intact. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house. Guys, this is a great warning. Not part of the message, but a great warning, okay? A great warning. Girls, you can quit elbowing him. He got it, all right? He understands. If there's nobody else but the woman, he stays out of the house, all right? There we go. 12, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that, I lifted up my voice and cried out. He left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him," that's Potiphar, "the same story, saying, 'The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house.' As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, 'This is the way your servant treated me,' his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison." You may be seated. Thanks for hanging with me through that long text, but I wanted us to see the full weight of the story right there with Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Joseph has to be thinking, what in the world? Right? So he's put in Potiphar's house. Potiphar is now his master. Potiphar recognizes that God is all over Joseph's life. Now understand this. When you see with Potiphar, later you'll see with Pharaoh, when it says things like they recognize that God was all over Joseph's life, that is not them worshiping the God that you and I are worshiping this morning. They're recognizing that there's something divine or special about them. It is not Potiphar becoming a Christian, okay? Potiphar is not worshiping or recognizing or acknowledging the one true God. He's just saying there's something special about this guy, and I want to put him in charge of some things because I can trust him. There's something special over his life. But if you're Joseph, you've got to be thinking, maybe I should have done the wrong thing. There's a very good chance, at least initially, that had Joseph given in to Potiphar's wife's request, that no one would have found out initially, right? She wouldn't have told her husband about it initially, right? It doesn't seem for Joseph, it doesn't seem to pay off to do the right thing. But he keeps his purity, he keeps his integrity, he recognizes this, and then all of a sudden you find him doing exactly what God would want him to do. He finds himself in this compromising opportunity and he flees. That's how his coat gets left behind. But she's got pretty good evidence, right? I mean, what court of law would this evidence not stand up in? She's got his garment. He's like, I wasn't there. No, here's your garment. And Joseph, I think, would have to think the kind of thing I would be thinking, and maybe you would be thinking, like, God, where are you? Like, I did everything how you would want it, and you give me this. God, what's the problem? Do you care? Do you see me? If you do see me, God, why have you stopped loving me? Can you imagine that? I mean, he's got to be thinking that, and the same kind of things that we see in our lives. There are so many things that happen in your life and in my life, and it makes us go, you can't be there, God. You just look at this. You're not even in the same time zone. Like, you're nowhere near. Now, what was true for Joseph in these moments, and what is true for us in these moments? If you would look at, finish out the chapter 21 through 23, I want you to see what was true for Joseph in these moments, and then let's deduce that this is what's true for us. Here's what the chapter finishes with in 21. But the Lord, remember, he's got terrible circumstances, but here's what it says. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Okay. Remember that the author of Genesis, most people ascribe this to being Moses, but there's a lot of debate on that. But nonetheless, the author of Genesis is not sharing this story as it's unfolding. So he's not on the scene reporting. He's looking back over Joseph's life, and he's recognizing some things that were true about God and Joseph, even if Joseph may not have recognized it in this moment. Because it says that there's all this success happening. I don't know about you, but this doesn't look like success to me. Right? It's like, yeah, you're the top of the food chain in prison, but you're in prison, right? I mean, who cares if you're number one in prison? But that's Joseph's story. You're like, that doesn't look like success. I want to give you an equation that most of us live by. And so if you live by this, normally you're not alone. Most of us live by this equation. Here it is. When there's good in our life, for us, that equates to God being present and being for us. And we should acknowledge it in that way. But these are the times when something happens awesome, you get on Facebook or you call your parents or you tell your boyfriend, hey, this incredible thing happened. God's amazing, isn't he? And I'm not tearing you down for saying that. I want you to think that, right? When you get the job you want, you should say, God is incredible. I got the job I wanted. When those of you who thought that you would never get any girl, get the girl of your dreams, guys, you should be like, this is awesome. Right? God, thank you. When God gives you children, if you want children, right? If you don't, that's a whole different story, but we won't talk about that. When you want the children and you get pregnant, you say, God he's opened my womb. He's amazing. And most of us, when we have good in our life, we equate that to God being present and God being for us. But oftentimes, those of us who live with that equation live with this other one as well, which is this: when there's pain in our life, God is either absent or he just doesn't care about us. And here's the thing. We make God so circumstantial. And what we need to learn is this: even if we can't yet believe that he is as good as I'm going to try to communicate to you in this message this morning, we must believe that he's at some level consistent. Right? For every one of us, there are seasons of our lives where the world around us gets the best of us, right? Okay, some of you, not seasons, but days. All right, you have minutes at least, right? Where the world around you, at least for a few minutes, seconds, where the world around you gets the best of you, right? You got extra sleep that night. You had your coffee before you interacted with any other human being, wise. And they got the best of you. Real high energy. You were an expert in the particular thing you were talking about, and you brought it that day. But we don't always bring our best. Sometimes what we do with our circumstances is look to God and pretend like he's had an off day or he didn't get enough sleep. God is not bringing his best in one moment that's awesome for you and then not bringing his A game when things begin to fade for you. And so you say to me, Ben, if that's true, then it must be, if he's still bringing his best to the world, it must be that he stopped bringing his best to me, or it simply must be that he's absent from my life. Because every one of us, let's be honest, every one of us go through moments where our circumstances seem to declare that God's absent from our lives. Right? Everyone except for the super spiritual people in the room are going, yep, that's right. Super spiritual people. No, Ben, I just always know he's going to bless. Listen, I want to arrive at that place, but I'm not playing games to get there. Right? In the midst of it, you think Joseph's going, this is awesome. Been sold twice, in prison, but I'm tops in prison. You know, my father thinks I'm dead. Cha-ching. I mean, come on. He's not going, God's going to work all things for my good. He's going to see that, and I hope we see that. But in the moment, this is his reality. This is his reality. God doesn't seem to be there. And what's true in these moments is God present. I want you to look at verse 21, and I want to give you 3 things that were true for Joseph regarding God's presence or absence. And I want you and I to lean into these things, even if it's almost impossible for us to believe these. The first one is this. It says, the Lord was with Joseph. It didn't look like God even knew where Joseph was, right? Joseph is in Egypt. He's away from his family. He's away from people that have the same religion, who believe in this God that he's worshiping, this God that he's trying to please, this God that he's trying to live for. But what it says to us is that the Lord was with him. Didn't look like it, did it? See, we want it to look like God's with us. We want to be proven to us. Of course, God's with us because we got the job. And some of us bet our entire faith on God and whether or not he delivers in one moment of our lives. Don't hedge your bets on one event in your life. Let me say that again. If you're going to hedge your bets on one event, it needs to be the cross that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But the rest of the events in your life, if you hedge your bet, if God is real, he will do this in this moment, be very careful of hedging all of your bets on one moment. So first, he was with Joseph. Secondly, he showed steadfast love to Joseph. There's a word Shauna and I have been talking a lot about just in our own lives. We've been reading through the Psalms. We've been thinking about this. And it's just saying God's love was steadfast. It didn't leave Joseph even when it didn't feel like love. Let me say that again. God's love was steadfast. When it felt like he wasn't being loved, God's love was never stronger than at that moment. But Ben, I want to feel it. I get that. But if you only trust his love when you feel his love, you're going to miss it. Let me say it again. If you only trust his love when you feel his love, you're going to absolutely miss it. So he's with Joseph. He's showing steadfast love to Joseph, and then he gives favor to Joseph. Now, does it look like Joseph has favor? Right? You see these words like favor and success in the text, and I'm just thinking that's not how I define favor. It's sold twice. You're in a strange land. You were doing good work for this man. You didn't do anything wrong, and now you're in prison for it. Favor? Success? But that's exactly what he's saying. Remember, he's looking back on this moment and going, at that time when it seemed like God didn't even know where Joseph was, he was with him. When it seemed like no one was loving Joseph, God's love was steadfast. There's a reason that he uses that descriptive word. He's letting us know the love did not leave when the problems came. He's letting us know when prison was the next step, God's love was still constant. God was faithful through the whole thing. God gave him favor when it seemed like there was no favor. Let me give you a few questions. You'll see them on the screen. The first one is this: can we trust God's presence in our pain? Can we trust God's presence in our pain? Now, for the 2 of you that are taking notes this morning, do not write down, can I feel God's presence in my pain? Let me say it again. Do not write down and do not internalize, Ben's saying, can I still feel God's presence in my pain? No, that's not what I said. Here it is. Can you trust his presence in your pain? Let me give you a second question. Can we trust his steadfast love when our circumstances can't necessarily prove it? Can we trust his steadfast love when our circumstances can't necessarily prove it? Because here's what you need to know. If you're trying to find a circumstance in your life to be able to prove the existence and love of God, you won't always be able to do that. If it's true that my circumstances have to show me whether or not God loves me, then I must confess honestly with you, and you must do the same. There are moments when God obviously doesn't love me. Does that make sense? Your circumstances won't always prove it. Joseph is not feeling the love of God, but he's getting the love of God. There will be days where you won't feel it, but you need to trust it. There will be days where your circumstances for weeks on end won't show you God is loving, but you need to know that he is. My feelings come and go. Anybody else's? All right, make sure no one discovered the secret juice. Because we got a sale for you right here. I need to trust his presence when I can't assume that he's there based on my circumstances. I need to trust his love when there's things going on in my life that just don't show that it's present. Can I trust it? And I think if we can trust it in the times like this, when life crashes, it'll make it even sweeter. It won't negate the good times. It'll make the good times even better. Can you trust his presence in the midst of your pain? Or have you chosen to have a God who is only present when everything's awesome? if that's your God, you don't have the true God, first of all. And secondly, what are you going to do when life crashes? These are the moments where we need to really put our faith in God more than the good times. But he's present in all times. He's present in all times. Now, with Joseph, this doesn't look like success, does it? How many of you would define success if you were in Joseph's career path? And remember, it's not Joseph saying it, just so we understand. Joseph is not going, thank you, Mr. Potiphar, for putting me irresponsibly into prison. I feel successful. The author is looking back over the span of Joseph's life and going, at this moment, it didn't look like it. It didn't feel like it. He was not climbing the corporate ladder, although he will. But he was getting success from God. The principle of this message is not to say if you'll hold on during the tough times, God will make you a success story. The principle of this message is to say if you and I can get to the place where we can trust God no matter where we find ourselves, no matter what's been done to us, no matter what our circumstances are, and no matter what we wish was true that isn't currently true. If you can find yourself trusting God in that place, what could that be like? What could that be like? There is a book that we read with our kids every morning at breakfast, and even those of you that don't have kids, you'll find this in the kids section at a bookstore maybe. Buy it anyway, okay? You're a single guy, single girl, young couple, no kids. Especially if you're like, I can't read 10 minutes of the Bible, but if you have a minute 47 to read, this is a great way. It just gives you a lot of great thoughts. This lady, Sally Lloyd Jones, she wrote 2 books that we really hold in high regard here at Epic. One is the Jesus Storybook Bible. Our teachers use that. We give that to new parents when we have the kind of parent-child dedication. But then this one is awesome. No matter how old your kids are, or if you don't have kids at all, it's called Thoughts to Make Your Heart Sing. And so we were eating breakfast. Don't think like, oh, they're doing 20-minute Bible studies in the morning with their kids. Nope, it's about 2 minutes. And hopefully they're all paying attention. That's kind of how we are. But there's this one we read recently, and I thought this fits perfect with the message for today. So it's story time, children. I've never done this that I can remember anyway. This one's called Life Raft. Got a helicopter up here. You got a life raft, lots of crashing waves. So I thought that was pretty appropriate. Here's what it says. It says, does it ever seem to you that nothing in your life is right? Not just for kids, is it? When things go wrong, God knows we might start to wonder, does God care about me? It's not just kids asking that question. Can he do anything about it anyway? So God makes you this promise to hold on to, a life raft for his children in a storm. And here's what he's saying from God's point of view. Here's what God's saying to us. I am not hurting you. I have a good plan for you and a bright future for you. I am planning unending good for you in your life. And then the next sentence is my favorite sentence. Here's what it says. And here's what we need to hear and what Joseph needed to know. Things are not always as they seem. I know what it looks like, Joseph, but things are not always as they seem. I know there's people in our church who've lost a baby in the last couple of weeks. I know what it looks like, but things are not always as they seem. For us, it seems like we may never get this adoption thing to take place, form after form. But things aren't always what they seem like. Then it says, things are not always as they seem, but God is always up to something big, always up to something good. I'm not asking you and I, can we get to the place where we can rationalize it? I'm not asking you and I to get to the place where we can prove it. I'm not asking you to get to the place where we can feel it. But can we trust it? Can we trust it? When it seems like there's nowhere to be found, can we trust it? In a moment, we're going to celebrate communion as we just think on and remember the great sacrifice of Jesus on our behalf. And I want to speak to a couple of different groups of people based on this theme of when life crashes. So some of you, if you're honest this morning, you're not like Joseph at all. Your life crashed, and while Joseph wasn't responsible for his life crashing, some of you are responsible for your life crashing. Amen. Some of us, we brought it on ourselves, right? Joseph, he didn't. He's really free. He's innocent. It's not his fault, but he's experiencing. But some of us, we brought it on ourselves. And some of us in those moments, you want to know, like, Ben, okay, my life has crashed. I'm responsible. I'm sure Joseph will be fine in the future. It wasn't his fault, but what about me? Is there hope for me? Or does this crash remain forever? Here's what God would say to you. You've sinned, right? Many of us have chosen to do things, all of us at some point in time, but some of us, our life has crashed because we brought stuff on ourselves. And we don't know if there's any hope. And we need to hear the merciful God say to us this morning, don't make the cross in vain. The shame that you're feeling is exactly what the cross is about. You heard what we sang in the previous song before I came up to speak? You took the cross, you took my shame. Now, he is a holy God. If we've not reached that moment where we've confessed our sin to him and we've repented of our sin, which just means to turn away from going against God and say, God, I confess that you're a holy God. I did wrong. I went against you. Now I want to turn and live the life you have for me, not perfectly, but God, I want to live that life. He promises forgiveness of sin. And some of you have yet to confess that and to repent, and that's what you need to do before we move into this time of communion or during the time. Others of you, you've prayed that prayer, you asked God for forgiveness, he gave you forgiveness, and you won't set it down. You've been freed from it for a decade, for 5 years, for 2 weeks, and you won't set it down. Because you're responsible, you think that you have to own this forever. And what God's wanting to say, this is the cross. It wasn't for the little petty sins only. It's for that big sin that you can't get over. You need to set it down. If you've confessed and repented and asked God to forgive you, you need to set it down and run towards the life he has for you now. This is what Jesus is famous for doing, taking broken lives, and every one of us have been there, and restoring us and helping us live out the purpose. Now, some of you, you've not been responsible, and yet your life has crashed because someone else has done something to you, or things just happen. Maybe you even blamed it on God. And for you, you're just going, Ben, I didn't do anything to deserve this. I believe for some of you that's true, just like it was for Joseph. You didn't do anything. You didn't cause it. It wasn't your fault. And I just want to say, as we enter this time of communion, I want you to know that you're not the only one, and I'm not the only one to bear responsibility for things that we didn't do. I want you to know that Joseph isn't the only one to one day bear responsibility for something he didn't do. In fact, I would say with a lot of confidence this morning that the cross embodies this idea more than anything that's ever happened to Joseph or you. I know you've had some life-crashing, terrible moments that you didn't cause. I know Joseph had a life-crashing moment that he didn't cause. People bearing things that they're not responsible for. But if you want to know where's the apex of this, where's the climax of this theme, the climax is on the cross. On the cross, what you have is this. There's a God who's been offended by my sin and your sin. And there's a payment that has to be made before you and I can be reconciled to this God. And the God who's the one who's been offended, he comes in the flesh as Jesus. He lives a perfect, sinless life. You and I are due punishment. He takes the punishment. You're like, whoa, that is a better story than mine, Ben. You're right. That's what the cross is about. A man bearing the weight of something he wasn't responsible for. This is the stunning, astounding moment in all of our faith. This is what everything hangs on. If the cross and resurrection aren't present, I've got nothing else to give you. On the cross, Jesus, at great cost to himself, he bears the weight that you're responsible for. He pays the sin that you owe. And as we enter communion, I want some of you for the very first time in your entire lives to see the beauty of this. I know that it's almost too good to be true. But that doesn't make it untrue. I know what you've done. Not all of you, but I know what many of you have done, but not in the way that God knows what you've done. You did offend God with your sin, so did I. You did owe this huge debt to be at peace with God, so did I. You could not pay that debt, but Jesus, of his own initiative, the scriptures say with great joy, he did pay that. He knows a little bit what it's like to bear the weight of something he isn't responsible for. But he did it with joy, and because he did it, you can go free from your sin forever. Not a bad exchange. Would you pray with me as we enter into this time of communion? The band...